Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. Richard, you have the first slide.
Yes, I do. I think everyone should be seeing it right now. Oh, sorry. There we go.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, so welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Onawa Biela, and I'm a Customer Success Specialist here at Let's Go Learn. And today we are presenting Navigating Special Education and Remote Learning, Tips and Experiences from the Field, presented by Richard Capone, CEO, and Dr. Kurt Hewlett, National Director of Special Education Services. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our hosts and panel of experts. Richard Capone, CEO and Chief Technologist for Let's Go Learn. Because everybody can wave hello. Dr. Kurt Hewlett, National Director, Special Education Services, Let's Go Learn. And our panel of experts, Phyllis Wolfram, Executive Director, International CASE. And Erin McGuire, President, International CASE.
So with that, we'd like to turn it back over to Richard to begin discussing remote learning and frameworks, tips from the field. Thanks for the opportunity, Richard.
All right, thank you very much. So we were very lucky, and back in January, one of our customers, Christine from Linwood in California, she said, you know, in the off chance that schools might close, could we expand our use of your software to the students who don't have a license of your Edge product? And you know, at the time, we said, sure, we'll do that. Little did we know that in another 3 weeks, every school was going to be closed. But the positive from that is we started planning early on. How do you implement remote learning? How do you implement sort of an accelerated way of dealing with this situation? So since that time, I've been involved in over a dozen remote planning meetings with different school districts. And what I've done is we've compiled those best practices and tips into this presentation. And I think our goal today is to help you operationalize some of the things you're going through. And the first thing I want to mention before I go into those 5 areas that we've broken into is that, in a sense, your building has been flipped upside down, right? We hear all this talk about implementing remote learning and distance learning, but that's not the only thing you have to do. You're transitioning your organization from a brick and mortar to operate virtually, which is huge by itself. And then you're also transitioning all your employees from working in a brick and mortar environment to working remotely. And that's another big task. So really, there's 3 things you have to do: distance learning, transforming your organization to be virtual, and transforming how your employees are trained and how they teach and do their jobs. So this is major. So these 5 areas that we have right now, it doesn't exactly have to be the model you follow, but it's pretty close. And so the first one I want to talk about is determining communication protocols. So this may seem simple, but not all districts have done this. And the ones who have had great success. You really have to have a single point of information for parents on an external website. You don't want to have parents going to school sites, going different places. You want them to go to the external website of the district, and from there they can launch whether they're a student with IEPs or they're different grade levels. So you need to really sort of consolidate everything. Now, this also applies to teachers. Surprisingly, not all organizations have good intranet sites. So you need to make sure you have a very good intranet site where everyone knows where they need to go. You don't want to have emails with attachments. And this seems like a simple thing, but when the plans are changing so rapidly, when you have attachments with your latest plan in an email, teachers get outdated. So again, you want to always point everyone to the external site for parents and your intranet site for teachers. The other thing that's really, really important, especially for students with IEPs and special educators, is your document storage, right? You really need to have this determined ahead of time. You want to use cloud storage. You don't want to have anything stored on any individual PCs, right? So you don't want teachers working remotely, saving files to their remote hard drives. It needs to be on cloud storage. And it's really important to make this clear to everyone ahead of time. You also need to work out simple things like file naming conventions. You know, 4 months from now, you don't want to go back and see a bunch of files that say Richard Capone on them, Richard Capone not knowing what they are. So it could even be something like last name, first name, what the document is, and maybe even a date. Because later on, you're going to have to take these documents and use them and organize them. So it's important to really determine this stuff up front. Now, as far as some tips in this area, not everyone realizes, but if you're using G Suite, G Suite actually has sites. It's called Google Sites. And so what I've seen some districts do is they've actually created intranet sites and extranet sites on Google Sites. And it's as simple as using Google Docs and sharing something. So now they've taken the website maintenance out of the hands of IT, and they put it into the special ed department, or they put it into the hands of the teachers. Because things are changing so fast, you want to have this. Another interesting thing is Google Docs and MS OneDrive. Again, you need to, especially from the documentation standpoint, you want to set those folders and permissions ahead of time. And I mentioned the pro tip there about permissions. This is really important from for IEPs and for documenting different compliance. You need to make sure that these permissions are set so that the documents aren't shared with the wrong people. Okay. So again, a lot of these tools are at your fingertips if you're using G Suite and also even the Microsoft products as well. So those are available to you. You just need to take advantage of that. All right, the next one is building your curriculum plan. All right. The number one thing I've heard from the districts I've been working with is limiting freeware and other non-sanctioned software. The problem right now is almost like the Wild West, right? Suddenly teachers are working remotely and they're using all different sorts of software. But the problem with that is you do not have control. Some of the software isn't even using privacy laws. You're sharing information with these other free shareware vendors. And so you need to really take a look at what you're using and make sure that it's controlled at the district level. You have to continue to provide faith, right? So standardize on something, and then you can adapt later on. But you need to sort of pick something to begin with. One of our recommendations, and I've seen a lot of schools doing this, is they're standardizing on Google Classroom, right? And this is a great tool. It's easy to find people who know how to use it. There's lots of videos on YouTube on how to use it as well. So you can pull some of the best YouTube videos to train your staff. But this is a really good way to start, starting with some of the foundational tools like Google Classroom, and then you move into other specialized instruction tools like Let's Go Learn, or something else that you're already using, right? So you want to sort of do this in phases. When I mentioned phases, this is something that's interesting. I've seen some schools do this where some districts, they're phasing in, initially it's paper-based instruction, and then they start rolling out automated instruction, so automated programs, and then finally they start doing teacher-directed personalized instruction. So this phase approach is allowing you to have time to not only train your staff, but also make sure that they're really comfortable using remote tools, teaching remotely, and really adopting this new plan. So this whole section here, building your curriculum plan, goes hand in hand with the next section I'll talk about in a second about your professional development. All right, so as far as some tips here, evaluate your current resources. You'll be surprised at some of the tools you're using. In an emergency situation like right now, I think we've added like 45,000 students over the past 60 days, but mainly they're with our current customers, right? It's very hard to evaluate or very hard to add brand new customers. It's possible, but initially I would say in an emergency situation, look and see what you have, use those resources now and try to expand them. Obviously include cloud storage in your training. Google Cloud and Microsoft OneDrive, sometimes they're very hard to use if you don't have some basic training on that. And we don't want to have documents getting lost or not backed up or not stored properly. Right there, and when you get the slides, you can look at this. This is a YouTube video that shows how to use Google Classroom. It's a pretty good video, 11 minutes long. I want to post that there for you. All right, so the next thing is setting up clear meeting and training protocols. All right, this links back to what I talked about the previous one. So you want to align your training with your curriculum planning. Okay, and so for instance, as you're rolling this out, initially you need to do training on your basic systems like Google Docs, Google Classrooms, right? And then you're going to be training on other systems. And then you'll be training teachers on the more teacher-directed systems and processes. But you have to sort of start somewhere first, and then you want to build on that. Okay. Have regular teacher meetings. This may seem logical, but not everyone has done it, really. Set some kind of regular schedule. Maybe Fridays are district trainings, and then Mondays are individual sites, and then maybe Monday afternoons for special education teachers. So have a regular schedule and make sure that this is sort of rolled out through all of your sites, through all of your schools. In terms of planning training, I think it's really helpful to do a multiple layered training phase. So let me explain. I've seen a lot of districts do this. First of all, you may do your hardcore district training. So you're training on Google Docs, Google Classroom, whatever it may be. But then immediately after that training, have site or PLC meetings to operationalize what they've just learned. Because what's happening sometimes is teachers are getting these trainings, and then it's a whole week before they have another follow-up meeting, and so they're not able to apply it. So what I would say is you have a district training, and the hour immediately afterwards, the sites and the PLC teams meet, and then they talk about, okay, how can I apply this to our situation? So they're operationalizing it, right? And then finally, hold open office hours for those people who need some more extra help, right? And the open office hours are really, really interesting. What we've seen is you can ask, and this tip right here, you can ask teachers to volunteer. So now you don't have to worry about this teacher being at one school and another one at another school not being accessible. Everyone's working remotely, so you can ask across your district who is really, really good at Google Classroom, who's really, really good at OneDrive, who's good at whatever it may be. And it's not even just technology, it's also going to be other skills as well. Who has good techniques for teaching remotely, working with particular students. And so you want to find these leaders, these people who are energetic about it, and hold open office hours on different topics. And this has been really, really popular with a lot of our customers, is these open office hours. The other thing too is, here's a little pro tip. We're now operating remotely, right? So built into G Suite as well as Microsoft Outlook, there's built-in video conferencing. You may want to say, hey, all meetings now on, when we're meeting internally, let's do video conferencing. It allows people to have a connection. At Let's Go Learn, we're actually spread out throughout the country. 8 years ago, we made it in our employee handbook. It says all internal meetings will be video. And it helps people stay connected, because sometimes you have some people maybe in a state all by themselves, and it allows us to have better connections. And I think this is important for your guys' organizations as well. It's important to realize not all people handle isolation very well. You feel isolated, and you need to have that connection. All right, the next point here is monitoring and feedback procedures. Okay, so this is a really important one. We do all this training, but then if we don't have some kind of monitoring, we don't know whether it's working or not. So set up some teacher-student basic requirements. And here's an example. This doesn't have to be exactly what you do, but I've seen multiple schools say, okay, every week, teacher is going to check in with each student one time, and then they need to do one assignment per week. So this could be an example of what they do. They set up some minimum standards. What happens if they can't get a hold of the student, excuse me? Is it up to the teacher to figure it out, or can they get admin staff to support them, right? Maybe they need to track down the parent. Maybe they need to update the cell phone or email address. So these procedures need to be worked out ahead of time, right? Also, during your weekly meetings with the teachers, make sure they have a feedback opportunity to talk about how things are working. So don't just say you need to do all these things, but also give them an opportunity for feedback. Here's a pro tip I think is really, or a tip that's really interesting. One district in Pennsylvania, what they did is they set up the very beginning of every teacher meeting, they came back and would say, okay, in the first 5 minutes, everyone gives their scoreboard. So they say, all right, teacher A says, I met with 20 out of my 30 students. I was able to contact them, and I made 25 individual lessons. The next teacher goes and gives their specs. I was able to connect with 10. The next teacher, I was able to connect with 15. And so that way, everybody is sort of in it together. They quickly sort of say their stats. It allows you to keep up to date on what's going on. If somebody is having very low success with that, then it allows you to sort of, oh, what's going on? Why are you having a hard time, connecting with your students? And then you could all work through it together. So it allows people to sort of stay connected and as a team really support each other in terms of keeping these metrics high. The next thing I want to talk about is if you are using programs, remote learning programs, I know for our system, you can set up weekly subscription reports. So every Saturday, we send out an email and say, how much has each student spent on the learning program, whether it's math or ELA. Most vendors probably have reports like this. So if you're using certain tools, talk to your vendor, ask them, how do I implement the subscription reports? All right, this final piece is a real tough one because this ties into equity and access, right? Hardware and internet access. Coordinate with your IT department or general school effort. I've seen a lot of schools push out hardware in phases. Phase one might be the easier parents to reach, the ones who sort of sign up to get hardware, and then they sort of work, for next phase, maybe the teachers, the parents they haven't been able to get hold of, and so on and so forth. But what you need to be sure is that you coordinate with them and you are able to add notes saying, hey, which students require specialized equipment? Because what you don't want happening is you don't want this hardware to be pushed out and suddenly one of your students with an IEP gets a Chromebook without, and they can't use the trackpad, right? Maybe they need a mouse. So this stuff needs to be, from the very, very beginning, planned. You don't want your IT department just to shove hardware out without regard to your students' needs. So make sure you have this worked out, okay? And the other thing is that you also need to have feedback into this. So don't just have a list that's one-sided. You need to be able to look at that list in real time and see what's going on. So again, this sort of ties into communication protocols as well, but we need to make sure this is all defined. All right, a couple pro tips here I want to mention. A lot of districts are partnering with wireless companies. Some of the ones I've known who had partnerships before the whole pandemic were in very good shape because they already had hotspots. Most wireless companies have a charity division or money allocated to giving out free hotspots. So if you haven't started a partnership, call Verizon, call some local provider, find out what you can do to get access for students who need it, right? And then again, just getting back to documentation, make sure you're using some kind of Google Doc where everyone has access, they can see what's going on, so that way you have real-time updates on who's getting hardware. Okay, so this is just a quick recap then. So in terms of the 5 areas, remote learning framework doesn't exactly have to be this. You could set it up in your own categories, but this is roughly determining communication protocols, building your curriculum plan, set clear meeting training protocols, monitoring and feedback procedures, and finally hardware internet access action plans. Now, all 5 of these, each one probably takes 5 to 6 hours of planning, right, in meetings. So you really have to get started on this, and eventually this could become your framework document. It becomes a living document you keep in your school district, and you edit it and change it over time. But this becomes the framework for you all to use on how we deal with school closures. Right? Now, I have one more slide I want to cover before we jump into the QA. I just want to talk a little bit about why Let's Go Learn has been a part of so many of these meetings. And I think part of it has to do with the appropriateness of what we provide to school districts. Right from the get-go, we were able to provide remote learning for tiers 1, 2, and 3. And this is really, really important. So, we've strived to always make sure our technology can work for all students. And this is one big value proposition that we provided. The other thing is to work on not only immediate, but long-term support of FAPE compliance. And this has been really, really important for us. And it should be important for you with any of your vendors you work with, because right now, a lot of people are trying to plan, how do I do this long-term, right? And so look at these issues, not just for Let's Go Learn or whatever vendors you're working with. I think it's important to think about these and question it. Another piece is just in terms of diagnostic data, things have really changed. The technology nowadays says that you can actually have very powerful tests that work online. Now, can it replace a human, face-to-face? No, it can't. But it can provide, some pretty good information, and it gets you, maybe 70% of the way, or for some students further. And it depends on a particular student. But this is really important to look at the new diagnostic systems that are out there. The other big piece here is supporting teachers with SDI and including progress monitoring. Teachers have such a big burden. There's so much technology. I think what we've been trying to do is really lower the threshold for teachers to do personalized learning and making our systems very easy. And that's what we've been doing overall. And finally, long-term streamlining of the entire IEP process. Our goal has been always to try to streamline the process. We are listening to special educators like yourselves and saying, how can we make our system better? As a matter of fact, this year, we're doing another round of improving our IEP reports for individual students, and that's something we're getting more input from our customers. All right, well, that's it, right? Thank you very much. We are now going to jump into the expert panel question and answer section. So if everyone could go ahead and turn back on your cameras and unmute your microphones, we'll go ahead and take some questions from the audience.